I stood in the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital in Denver, Colorado, watching doctors work frantically on my 6-month-old son, Oliver, when my stepmother-in-law, Patricia, suddenly grabbed my arm and hissed loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear, "This is what happens when you let an unfit mother play house with children who aren't really hers." Her words sliced through me like broken glass. My name is Sophia Richardson, and until 3 hours ago, I thought I was living a normal life as a working mother, trying to balance everything. My husband Marcus and I had been married for 4 years, and Oliver was our miracle baby after 2 miscarriages that had nearly destroyed my faith in becoming a mother. But Marcus also had a 12-year-old daughter, Emma, from his first marriage to Patricia's daughter, Nicole, who had died in a car accident when Emma was 6. The Richardson family had never accepted me. Patricia made that clear from day one, constantly reminding everyone that I was just the replacement wife, who could never measure up to Nicole's memory. She'd raised Emma since the accident, treating her more like a possession than a granddaughter. And when Marcus and I married, she fought the custody arrangement that brought Emma to live with us full-time with the ferocity of someone who viewed children as extensions of her own identity. Now, as Oliver lay unconscious with mysterious symptoms, violent vomiting, dangerous lethargy, and what doctors were calling possible multi-organ failure, Patricia stood in that sterile waiting room, systematically turning every nurse, every doctor, every family member who'd rushed to the hospital against me with the precision of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. "I told Marcus this would happen," she announced to anyone who would listen, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the supposed emergency, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon she was preparing to use. You can't trust someone with no maternal instincts to care for vulnerable children. Some women just aren't built to be mothers. And now look what's happened. My parents, David and Catherine, had driven straight through from Phoenix the moment they got my panicked call, not stopping except for gas during the 12-hour journey. But they'd arrived to find Patricia already holding court in the waiting room, already poisoning every ear with her carefully crafted version of events. My sister-in-law, Jennifer, who had always seemed neutral in family disputes, now nodded along sympathetically with Patricia's narrative. And Marcus's brother Thomas actually said, "Mom has a point. Sophia's always seemed overwhelmed by motherhood." These people had eaten at my dinner table just last week. They'd watched me rock Oliver through his colicky evenings for hours without complaint, praised my patience during Emma's difficult adjustment periods when she'd test boundaries after years of Patricia's controlling parenting style, told me how grateful they were that Marcus had found happiness again after Nicole's tragic death. Now they stood in judgment, a jury to Patricia's prosecutor, while my husband remained conspicuously silent, staring at his hands like they held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Dr. Williams, the pediatric emergency physician whose kind eyes had seen too many family tragedies, came through the double doors with the grave expression that every parent dreads. "Mrs. Richardson, we need to talk privately about Oliver's condition and some very concerning test results we've received from the lab." But before I could respond, Emma stepped forward from where she'd been sitting quietly in the corner for the past 3 hours, clutching her backpack like it contained precious cargo that might save us all. Her dark eyes, so much like Marcus's, so much like the mother she'd lost too young, were filled with tears, but her voice was steady as she looked directly at Dr. Williams with the kind of determination I'd never seen in her young face. "Doctor, should I show you what Patricia put in Oliver's baby food yesterday? I have pictures and everything written down." The waiting room went dead silent. Patricia's face transformed from righteous indignation to genuine terror in a single heartbeat, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against skin that had gone paper white. Marcus finally looked up from his hands, and I realized my 12-year-old stepdaughter was about to expose a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about how we'd ended up in this nightmare. 8 months earlier, I believed I was finally building the family I'd always dreamed of having. Our house in suburban Denver was exactly what Marcus and I had envisioned when we bought it 3 years ago. 4 bedrooms painted in warm colors, a big backyard with mature oak trees, close to good schools for Emma, and the baby we were desperately trying for after losing 2 pregnancies that had left scars on both our hearts. Emma had been the biggest surprise of my marriage to Marcus. I'd expected resentment, difficulties, the typical stepmother challenges that every parenting book warned about. Instead, I found a thoughtful, observant child who seemed hungry for the kind of stable home life she'd missed since her mother's death. She helped me paint the nursery when we found out I was pregnant with Oliver, spending entire weekends carefully edging around windows and door frames, picked out clothes for her future baby brother with the excitement of someone who'd been waiting years for a sibling, and never once made me feel like an intruder in her relationship with her father. "I'm glad Daddy married you," she told me one evening, as I rubbed my growing belly, feeling Oliver's strong kicks. You make him laugh like he did in the pictures with Mommy. Patricia never liked it when he laughed too much. That comment should have been my first warning about the undercurrents in this family. The pregnancy hadn't been easy. 2 previous miscarriages at 12 and 16 weeks had left me anxious and overprotective, checking for bleeding every time I went to the bathroom, afraid to exercise, afraid to lift anything heavy, afraid to hope too much. Dr. Sarah Chen, my obstetrician who'd guided me through the losses with patience and compassion, prescribed bed rest during the final trimester when my blood pressure started climbing, which meant Emma often helped me around the house, bringing me snacks, keeping me company during Marcus's increasingly long shifts at the accounting firm where he was trying to make partner. I like taking care of you, Emma told me one afternoon as she brought me tea and crackers. It makes me feel useful. Patricia always said I was too much trouble, but you make me feel like family. Oliver arrived on a snowy February morning after 18 hours of labor that tested every limit of my pain tolerance. He was healthy and perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of squirming life that made all the fear and loss worthwhile. Marcus cried when he held him for the first time, and Emma insisted on being the first person besides us to hold her baby brother, sitting in the hospital chair with pillows propped around her for support. He's so tiny, she whispered, supporting his head exactly like the nurses had shown her. I promise I'll always protect him, Oliver. I won't let anyone hurt you. Those words would haunt me later, when I realized she'd seen danger coming long before any of the adults did. Patricia had been different during the pregnancy. Not warm, because warmth wasn't in her emotional vocabulary, but less openly hostile than usual. She'd even thrown me a baby shower, though she'd made sure everyone knew it was for Marcus's sake and baby's, not because I approve of this marriage. She'd invited all of Nicole's old friends, people I barely knew, and spent the entire afternoon sharing stories about Nicole's pregnancy with Emma while I sat there like a spectator at my own celebration. I'd thought maybe motherhood would finally earn me her acceptance, or at least her tolerance. I was catastrophically wrong. The problems started when Oliver was about 3 months old and had settled into a somewhat predictable routine. Patricia began insisting on helping every Wednesday when Marcus worked late at the office, staying until 8 or 9 to manage what she called difficult clients. She'd arrive at 2 p.m. sharp every week, letting herself in with the key Marcus had given her, despite my discomfort with the arrangement. Carrying bags of supplies and wearing the expression of someone preparing for battle. You look tired, Sophia, she'd announce the moment she walked through the door, surveying my living room like she was inspecting a crime scene for evidence of my inadequacy. New mothers often don't realize how much help they need. I raised 3 children and helped raise Emma since Nicole died. I know what real motherhood looks like. Her help felt more like an invasion. She'd hover while I nursed Oliver, making comments about how long he took to eat, suggesting formula would be more efficient for a busy mother. She'd reorganize his nursery while I was busy with laundry, moving his clothes to different drawers, changing the temperature settings on his monitor, rearranging his toys according to some system that made sense only to her, questioning every decision I made with the authority of someone who'd appointed herself the expert on my own child. Nicole never had these problems with Emma, became her constant refrain, delivered with the kind of sad shake of her head that made me feel like I was failing at the most basic level. Some women have natural maternal instincts. Others need more guidance and structure. Emma noticed everything. At 12, she was old enough to understand family dynamics, smart enough to recognize tension even when adults tried to hide it behind polite conversation. She'd started staying close whenever Patricia visited, doing homework at the kitchen table instead of in her room, finding excuses to help with Oliver's care, positioning herself as a silent witness to interactions that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Why does Patricia always sound mad when she talks to you? Emma asked one Wednesday evening after Patricia had finally left, leaving behind her usual trail of criticized choices and reorganized spaces. She's not mad, sweetheart, I lied, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. She just has strong opinions about how things should be done. She's trying to help. But you do everything right, Emma said with the fierce loyalty that had surprised me from the beginning of our relationship. Oliver is healthy and happy. You take good care of him. Mrs. Henderson next door told Daddy that you're the best mom she's ever seen with a baby. My stepdaughter saw what the adults chose to ignore. That Patricia's help was really criticism, wrapped in concern, control disguised as care. The Wednesday incidents escalated gradually, like a pot slowly coming to boil. Patricia would arrive with homemade baby food in little glass jars with handwritten labels, claiming store-bought was full of chemicals and preservatives that are making children sick. She'd criticize my feeding schedule, my choice of diapers, the way I burped him after bottles, the temperature of his bathwater, the softness of his mattress. Everything became evidence of my inexperience. In my day, babies ate what we gave them and liked it, she'd announce, spooning her concoctions into Oliver's mouth while I watched helplessly from across the kitchen. All this fussing about organic this and natural that, it's just making children weak and mothers neurotic. Oliver always seemed fussier on Wednesday evenings. He'd cry more than usual, sleep less soundly, sometimes refuse his regular formula completely as if his tiny system was rejecting something. I mentioned it to Dr. Chen during his 4-month checkup, describing the pattern I'd started noticing. Some babies are sensitive to changes in routine, she explained, making notes in his chart. Try to keep his feeding schedule as consistent as possible. If the fussiness continues, we might need to look at food sensitivities. But Patricia insisted her way was better, her experience more valuable than my instincts. He needs to learn to eat different foods. You're making him too dependent on routine, too used to getting his way. That's not healthy for child development. Emma started keeping a journal around this time, though I didn't know the full extent of what she was documenting then. She'd sit at her desk in the evenings, writing carefully in a purple notebook she'd bought with her allowance money, her handwriting getting neater and more detailed with each entry. "What are you always writing about?" I asked one night as I tucked her into bed, noticing how she'd filled almost half the notebook already. "Just stuff I want to remember," she said, closing the notebook carefully and placing it in her nightstand drawer. "Things that happen at school. Things I think about. Things I notice around the house." "Like what kind of things you notice?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "Like how Patricia talks different when Daddy's not around. And how Oliver gets sick every Wednesday night after she brings him food. And how you always look sad after Patricia visits even though you try to hide it." I should have paid more attention to what my daughter was trying to tell me. I should have asked more questions, dug deeper into her observations, trusted the instincts of a child who'd learned to be watchful because her world had been turned upside down before. Instead, I dismissed it as normal family dynamics, the kind of adjustments every blended family had to make. The last Wednesday before Oliver ended up in the hospital, Patricia arrived with a new recipe she'd researched especially for growing babies. It was a thick, green mixture that smelled strongly of herbs and something medicinal that made my stomach turn. "What's in it?" I asked, examining the jar she'd brought, noting how the contents looked different from her usual concoctions. Darker, more viscous, with an oily film on top. "Just natural ingredients," she said dismissively, but I noticed how she turned her body slightly to block my view as she stirred it. "Spinach, kale, some homeopathic remedies to help with his digestion. He's been too fussy lately. This will settle his stomach and help him sleep through the night like babies should." I watched her feed it to Oliver, who made faces and tried to push the spoon away more vigorously than usual. His little hands pushed against her wrist, and he turned his head from side to side, clearly not wanting what she was offering. "He doesn't seem to like it," I observed, reaching toward him instinctively. "Children don't always like what's good for them," Patricia replied firmly, forcing another spoonful into his mouth despite his protests. Sometimes mothers need to be more insistent instead of giving in to every whim. Nicole understood that discipline starts early. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table, but I noticed she kept glancing up, her pencil hovering over her math problems as she watched the interaction with growing concern. Later, I would learn that she'd been timing these feeding sessions, documenting Oliver's reactions, building a case that none of us adults were smart enough to see developing. That night was the worst yet. Oliver was sicker than he'd ever been, vomiting repeatedly in projectile streams that soaked through multiple changes of clothes. He couldn't keep his regular formula down, couldn't even keep water down, and seemed unusually lethargic. Not the normal sleepiness of a full baby, but something deeper and more concerning. His usual bright alertness was replaced by a frightening dullness in his eyes. When he was still listless the next morning, refusing to eat and barely responding to my voice, I called Dr. Chen with hands that shook as I dialed. "Bring him in immediately," she said after I described his symptoms, her professional calm not quite hiding the concern in her voice. The pediatric office was busy that Thursday morning, but Dr. Chen took one look at Oliver, and her expression grew serious. His temperature was slightly elevated, his reflexes seemed sluggish, and he was dehydrated from the persistent vomiting. She checked his pupils with a small flashlight, listened to his heart and lungs, tested his muscle tone. "Has he eaten anything unusual in the last 24 hours?" she asked, making notes on his chart. "My mother-in-law brought some homemade baby food yesterday. He didn't seem to like it very much, but she insisted on feeding it to him anyway." Dr. Chen frowned, setting down her pen. "What was in it exactly?" She said spinach, kale, and some homeopathic remedies for digestion. It smelled different from her usual recipes, stronger, more medicinal. "Sophia, babies Oliver's age shouldn't have any homeopathic remedies. Some be toxic to infants, and we have no way of knowing the dosage or purity. I want to run some tests immediately." The blood work came back within 2 hours, showing elevated levels of several compounds that shouldn't have been in a 6-month-old system. Dr. Chen's face was grim as she reviewed the results, making phone calls to specialists and consulting reference books. "We need to get him to the emergency room for more comprehensive testing," she said carefully. "Some of these levels are concerning, and I want toxicology specialists to take a look." "Is he going to be okay?" I asked, holding Oliver's limp body against my chest, feeling how different he felt. Too warm, too still, too unlike the active baby who usually squirmed and babbled during doctor visits. "We need to find out exactly what he ingested," she said carefully, and I could hear the professional training that kept her from speculating about worst-case scenarios. Some herbal compounds can cause serious reactions in infants, especially when combined with other substances. I called Marcus from the hospital parking lot, trying to keep my voice calm while my world fell apart. "Oliver's sick. We're at St. Mary's emergency room. Dr. Chen thinks he might have had a reaction to something Patricia fed him yesterday." "What do you mean? Reaction?" His voice was sharp with the defensiveness I'd learned to expect whenever his mother was mentioned. "She brought homemade baby food with herbs in it. Dr. Chen says some herbs can be toxic to babies." His blood work showed elevated levels of compounds that shouldn't be there. There was a long pause, and I could hear him processing this information, probably trying to find a way to make it not be his mother's fault. "I'll call Mom and ask what was in it. She would never intentionally hurt Oliver." That automatic defense of his mother, that instant assumption that I must be overreacting or misunderstanding, it crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamic. His mother could do no wrong in his eyes, while I was always the hysterical new mother who didn't know what she was doing. "Marcus, the doctors are worried. This isn't about blame. It's about finding out what's wrong with our son." "I'll be right there," he said, but I could already hear him shifting into protective mode. Not protecting Oliver, but protecting his mother from implications he couldn't bear to consider. By the time Marcus arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, Patricia had somehow beaten him there, despite not being called, and was already working the waiting room like a seasoned politician, garnering sympathy and systematically casting doubt on my fitness as a mother with the skill of someone who'd been planning this campaign for months. "I've been trying to help that girl for months," she told anyone who would listen, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed they remained perfectly dry. "She's overwhelmed, doesn't want to admit she's in over her head. I've watched her struggle with basic motherhood tasks. Now she's trying to blame me for her own inadequacies." Emma sat quietly in the corner with her backpack, watching everything with those intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She'd insisted on coming to the hospital despite it being a school day, and Marcus hadn't argued, probably because he was too distracted to think about normal routines. Now she observed the family dynamics playing out around her sick baby brother, and I could see her making mental notes, preparing for something the rest of us didn't see coming. When Dr. Williams emerged from the treatment area with serious news about Oliver's condition, kidney function concerns, possible liver involvement, neurological symptoms that suggested systematic poisoning, and Emma stepped forward with her shocking question about what Patricia had put in his food, I knew our family was about to implode in ways none of us could have imagined. Emma opened her backpack and pulled out a small digital camera, an early birthday present from my parents that she'd been using to document everything from school projects to family gatherings. Her hands were steady, despite the tears streaming down her face, as she addressed the entire waiting room. "I've been taking pictures," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the space that had fallen silent. "Every Wednesday, when Patricia comes over, I started doing it because something felt wrong, and adults never believe kids when we try to tell them about bad things." She handed the camera to Dr. Williams, who scrolled through the images with increasing alarm. The first few photos showed Patricia in our kitchen, but as he continued scrolling, the images became more disturbing. "This shows Mrs. Patricia crushing pills into baby food," he said, holding up the camera screen for everyone to see. The image was clear. Patricia at our kitchen counter, prescription bottle in one hand, crushing device in the other, baby food jar open in front of her. Patricia lunged toward Emma, trying to grab the camera with desperate fury. "That little brat is making things up. She's always been a disturbed child, jealous of the attention the baby gets. Those pictures are fake." But Emma stepped behind Dr. Williams and continued speaking with a maturity that broke my heart. "I wrote everything down too. Every Wednesday for 2 months. Every time she brought food and mixed medicine into it. Every time she said things about Sophia not being a real mother. Every time she said Oliver needed stronger medicine to make him stop crying and be a better baby." She pulled out her purple journal, the one I'd seen her writing in night after night, now understanding it had been so much more than childhood diary entries. "May 15th, she read aloud, her voice steady, despite her tears. "Patricia brought green food for Oliver. I saw her crushing up white pills from a bottle in her purse. When Sophia wasn't looking, she mixed the powder into the jar. She told me it was natural medicine, but I know pills aren't natural. I asked what kind of medicine, and she said it was vitamins. But vitamins don't come in bottles with labels from pharmacies. Marcus grabbed the journal, reading over Emma's careful handwriting, his face going progressively whiter with each entry. The waiting room had become completely silent except for the sound of his ragged breathing. May 22nd. Patricia used more pills today. She told me it was still vitamins, but when I asked to see the bottle, she put it away fast and told me to mind my own business. She said, "Good children don't ask too many questions." Oliver threw up a lot after eating her food, and Sophia looked scared. I wanted to tell her what I saw, but Patricia said if I told anyone, they would take Oliver away from Sophia for not being a good enough mother. "You manipulative little spy," Patricia hissed, but her voice was shaking now. "How dare you document family business like some kind of detective? Children should respect their elders, not sneak around taking pictures." Emma looked straight at her grandmother and spoke with a composure that amazed everyone in the room. May 29th. Patricia said Oliver cried too much, and that meant Sophia was a bad mother who needed to learn lessons. She said she was going to fix the problem permanently this time. She used a lot more pills in his food. I counted them before she crushed them up. 6 white pills instead of the usual 2. She said after today, he'd be much quieter, and Sophia would finally understand that she needed help. Dr. Williams was already on his phone with hospital security and the police, speaking in the urgent but controlled tones of someone who'd seen child abuse cases before. "I need toxicology to run a full panel for pharmaceutical compounds, and I need security to detain Mrs. Patricia Richardson for questioning immediately." Patricia tried to push past the gathering crowd toward the exit, but Marcus caught her arm with a grip that looked painful. "Mom, what did you give my son? What medications did you put in his food?" "I was helping," she screamed, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking completely. "That woman doesn't know how to handle a baby properly. He cried all the time, disrupted the household, made everyone miserable. I was making him easier to manage, teaching her what real mothers have to do." "With what medication?" Marcus's voice was barely controlled, and I could see him struggling to process that his mother, the woman who'd raised him, who'd helped raise Emma, who'd been his anchor after Nicole's death, was confessing to drugging his infant son. "Just mild sedatives," she said, as if medicating an infant was a reasonable parenting technique. "From your father's old prescription bottles. He never finished them after his surgery last year. I researched the dosages online, just enough to help Oliver sleep better and cry less. That's what good grandmothers do when mothers can't handle their responsibilities." The truth hit like a physical blow. Marcus's father had died 18 months ago after complications from heart surgery, leaving behind a medicine cabinet full of powerful prescription drugs that Patricia had apparently been hoarding. She'd been systematically crushing heart medications, painkillers, and sedatives into baby food, turning my son into a test subject for her twisted ideas about child rearing. "Those medications could have killed him," Dr. Williams said, his professional composure slipping for the first time. "Adult cardiac medications and sedatives given to an infant can cause respiratory depression, organ failure, brain damage, or death. What you've done is attempted murder." Emma wasn't finished with her revelations. She pulled a plastic baggie from her backpack, handling it carefully like the evidence it was. "I saved some of the baby food from yesterday. After I saw her use so many pills, I thought maybe someone would need to test it if Oliver got really sick. I didn't want anyone to say Sophia was lying." My 12-year-old stepdaughter had been conducting her own investigation while every adult in her life failed to protect her baby brother. She documented systematic poisoning, preserved physical evidence, and waited for the right moment to expose a monster who wore the mask of a concerned grandmother. The police arrived within 10 minutes, their sirens cutting through the normal sounds of hospital life. Detective Lisa Martinez, a specialist in crimes against children, took Emma's statement while Marcus sat in a plastic chair, holding his head in his hands and rocking slightly like someone trying to comfort himself. I stayed with Oliver while doctors worked frantically to flush the accumulated toxins from his tiny system. Patricia was arrested and charged with child endangerment, administering controlled substances to a minor, attempted poisoning, and conspiracy to commit child abuse. The evidence Emma had collected, detailed photographs showing the drugging process, comprehensive journal entries documenting escalating abuse, even a preserved sample of the tainted food, made the case so strong that Patricia's expensive lawyer would later advise her to take a plea deal, rather than face trial. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. The damage to our family was so extensive, it felt irreversible. Marcus couldn't look at me for weeks after the arrest. Not because he blamed me for what happened, but because he couldn't face the reality of what his mother had done while he defended her, enabled her, gave her access to our home and our child. Every time he'd chosen her word over mine, every time he'd dismissed my concerns as new mother anxiety, every time he'd told me I was being dramatic about his mother's behavior, it had all created the perfect environment for Patricia to nearly kill our son with methodical precision. I gave her a key to our house, he said one night as we sat in Oliver's nursery, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in months. I told you to accept her help. I defended her when you tried to tell me something was wrong. I chose my mother over my wife and son repeatedly, and it almost cost Oliver his life. She fooled everyone, I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. Emma hadn't been fooled. A 12-year-old child had seen what all the adults missed. No, he said quietly, his voice breaking. Emma saw the truth from the beginning. A 12-year-old girl figured out what all of us adults were too blind or too cowardly to see. She documented everything, preserved evidence, waited for the right moment to save her baby brother. What does that say about us? What does that say about me as a father? The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Patricia's planning and manipulation. Her computer history showed searches dating back 4 months, safe sedatives for infants, how much sleeping medication for babies, natural ways to make babies quiet, and most chilling of all, infant overdose symptoms, and how to make bad mothers look responsible. She hadn't just been drugging Oliver impulsively. She'd been researching, planning, escalating the doses gradually to avoid detection, while building a narrative that would frame me as an incompetent mother when something finally went wrong. The Wednesday before his hospitalization, she'd given him nearly 10 times the starting dose, enough to cause the organ damage that had brought us to the emergency room. The trial lasted 6 months and became a local sensation. Emma testified with a composure that amazed everyone in the courtroom, reading from her journal, explaining her photographic evidence, describing the progression of Patricia's behavior with the precision of a trained investigator. She documented not just the drugging, but Patricia's psychological manipulation, her attempts to isolate me from family support, her systematic undermining of my confidence as a mother. I knew something was wrong from the beginning. Emma said from the witness stand, speaking directly to the jury with clarity that belied her age. Patricia never wanted Daddy to marry Sophia, and she hated that Oliver made them happy together. She told me once that if Sophia couldn't handle being a mother, Daddy would have to choose between his new family and his real family. When adults don't listen to kids about dangerous things, sometimes kids have to find their own ways to protect their family. Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint her as a concerned grandmother who'd made a tragic mistake, a woman grieving her late husband who'd simply wanted to help with a fussy baby. But Emma's documentation destroyed that narrative completely. The photographs showed clear intent and premeditation. The journal entries revealed a pattern of escalating abuse masked as caregiving. The preserved food sample contained enough pharmaceutical compounds to kill an adult, let alone an infant. During cross-examination, the defense attorney made the mistake of suggesting that Emma had fabricated evidence or misunderstood what she'd witnessed. Emma looked him directly in the eye and said, "I have a brother who almost died because adults didn't listen when I tried to tell them something was wrong. I won't let anyone say I'm lying about the person who tried to kill him." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me across the courtroom and screamed, "This is your fault! If you'd been a better mother, if you'd accepted the help you needed, none of this would have happened. You destroyed this family." Even in defeat, facing decades in prison for trying to murder an infant, she couldn't accept responsibility for her actions. Marcus and I attempted marriage counseling, but the foundation of our relationship had been shattered beyond repair. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, our therapist, helped us understand that the problem wasn't just Patricia's actions, but the family system that had enabled them. Marcus had been conditioned from childhood to prioritize his mother's feelings over everyone else's well-being, creating an environment where she felt entitled to control our household, our children, our lives. Trust, once broken this completely, requires both parties to do intensive work, Dr. Thompson explained during one particularly difficult session. Marcus, you chose your mother over your wife consistently for 4 years. Sophia, you've learned that your husband won't protect you or your children when it matters most. Those are deep wounds that may not heal within the context of this marriage. We tried for 8 months, attending weekly sessions, doing homework assignments, attempting to rebuild intimacy and trust. But every time I looked at Marcus, I saw the man who'd handed his mother a key to our house, who'd dismissed my concerns as hysteria, who'd created the circumstances that nearly killed our son. And every time he looked at me, he saw the evidence of his failure as a husband and father. We divorced a year after the trial, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion and the recognition that some damage can't be undone. The custody arrangement was complicated by Emma's adamant refusal to live with her father. "I love Daddy," she told the family court judge during the custody hearing, but he didn't believe me when I tried to tell him something was wrong. Sophia is the one who listened to me, who believed in me when I had to protect Oliver. She's my real mom now, and I want to stay with my family. At 13, Emma was old enough to have a strong voice in custody decisions, and her testimony about feeling unsafe in any environment where Patricia might have influence was compelling. The judge awarded me primary custody of both children, with supervised visitation rights for Marcus until he completed extensive therapy and parenting classes. We moved to a smaller house across town, just me, Emma, and Oliver. It was harder financially. My graphic design work from home barely covered our expenses, and child support payments were irregular as Marcus struggled with depression and guilt. But it was easier emotionally. No more walking on eggshells, no more defending my parenting choices to a hostile audience, no more wondering if someone in our extended family was plotting against my children. Emma continued therapy with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in child trauma who helped her process the weight of being the family truth teller. These sessions were crucial in helping Emma understand that documenting abuse wasn't a child's responsibility, but that her actions had saved her baby brother's life and prevented future victims. "You did something incredibly brave," Dr. Walsh told her during one session I was allowed to observe. "You saw danger when adults couldn't or wouldn't see it, and you found a way to protect someone you love. But carrying that responsibility was never your job, and I want to make sure you understand that what happened to your family wasn't your fault." Oliver recovered completely from the poisoning, though the doctors warned us to watch for developmental delays or learning difficulties that might manifest as he grew older. He remained in my full custody, with Marcus allowed supervised visits twice a week at a family counseling center. The family court had determined that Marcus's history of enabling Patricia, combined with his initial refusal to believe the evidence against her, made unsupervised overnight visits potentially unsafe. 3 years later, Emma and I were having dinner at our kitchen table when she looked up from her algebra homework and said, "I still write everything down. You know, important things that happen, things people should remember." "Like what?" I asked, setting down my coffee cup. "Like how Oliver said his first real sentence last month when he told Mrs. Peterson that he loved his big sister, and how he laughs when I make funny faces during his bath time, and how you read us bedtime stories every night even when you're exhausted from client deadlines." She paused, then added with the wisdom of someone who'd survived trauma and emerged stronger. "And I write about how families can be stronger after they go through hard things, if they stick together and tell the truth, even when it's scary." My daughter. Because that's what Emma had become, officially through adoption proceedings and emotionally through everything we'd survived together, had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most crucial truths. And sometimes protecting the people you love means being brave enough to speak up when everyone else wants to stay silent. 6 months ago, Emma started a blog called Kids Who See Truth, where she writes about family dynamics, encourages other children to trust their instincts about unsafe situations, and shares resources for young people who feel unheard by the adults in their lives. Her first post, titled "When Grandparents Aren't Safe," has been shared thousands of times and led to 3 other children coming forward about relatives who were harming them. I want kids to know that if adults won't listen, they need to find ways to protect themselves and their families, she told me as she worked on her latest post. And I want adults to know that children see more than they think we do. Oliver, now a healthy 3-year-old with his father's dark eyes and my stubborn streak, doesn't remember the first year of his life, or how close he came to not having a second year. He calls Emma Sissy, and follows her around our house with the absolute trust of someone who's always been protected by her love. Sometimes I catch her watching him with fierce protectiveness, and I know she'll spend the rest of her life making sure he stays safe. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt silenced by family dynamics, or ignored when you tried to speak up about concerning behavior, please share this post. Your share might reach someone who needs to hear that their instincts are valid, that children's observations matter, that documentation can save lives when adults fail to see danger. Comment below if you've experienced family members who enabled toxic behavior, or if you've had to stand up to someone everyone else protected. Your stories deserve to be heard, and sharing them might help another person recognize similar warning signs in their own family. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this community. We share real stories that expose uncomfortable truths, stories that might save lives by showing warning signs others missed. Every upvote, every share, every comment helps us reach people who need to know they're not alone in seeing what others refuse to acknowledge. Thank you for listening to Oliver's story. Thank you for honoring Emma's courage in speaking truth when it mattered most. And thank you for being the kind of person who won't stay silent when children need protection. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we need protection from. Sometimes children see what adults refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes a 12-year-old girl with a purple notebook and a digital camera is the only thing standing between a baby and the person trying to kill him slowly, methodically, while everyone else looks the other way. And sometimes the only way to save a family is to expose the monster hiding within it, even when that monster wears the face of someone everyone else trusts.